You are exhausted from constantly trying to become someone. You've been striving, searching, chasing after standards and goals that seem necessary just to feel worthy of a happy life. But there is another path, still, profound, and deeply powerful. It is the reverse path, where you no longer chase in order to achieve, but surrender in order to become. This journey doesn't take you further away from yourself. It leads you back to the center, where you realize you have never lacked anything, never been separated from the true source of power. Through 16 refined and deeply spiritual lessons, you will not only learn powerful spiritual principles, but also be guided into direct experience, where striving is replaced by allowing, and effort dissolves into pure presence. This is not knowledge to memorize. It is a call to return home. The backwards law, when letting go, is when you receive. Water does not need to try to flow downhill. Flowers do not need to struggle to bloom in spring. Light does not need permission to enter the dark. Everything operates according to an invisible yet unbreakable law. There is a force in the universe, silent yet relentless, gentle yet irresistible. When you move against it, you become exhausted. But when you move with it, what once felt like a miracle becomes entirely natural. That is the backwards law. The more you try, the more you lose, the more you let go, the more you receive, not because you are unworthy, but because excessive effort itself creates resistance. You think you are striving to attain, but in reality, you are constantly sending out the signal that you are lacking. And the universe, like an invisible mirror, simply reflects that frequency. A man stands by the river, trying to hold water in his hands. He leans down, scoops it up, but only droplets remain between his fingers. He tightens his grip, and the water slips away even faster. Then comes a moment when he exhales, opens his palm, and lets the water rest there. No grasping, no forcing. The water finds its stillness on its own. That is the essence of this law. In life, you were taught to fight, to persist, to chase relentlessly after what you want. But rarely has anyone told you that some things cannot be forced, like happiness, like love, like true prosperity. These are not rewards for those who drain themselves, but the natural outcomes of a deep inner state. The universe does not respond to your actions. It responds to your state of being. When you desire something with desperation, you create a void in your mind. From that space, every action emerges from worry, control, fear of loss. And so you block the very flow you're longing for. A woman walks through the city, her eyes searching for validation, a smile of approval, recognition from others. Yet each step she takes is heavy with lack. When no one looks, she feels disappointed. When someone notices, she questions it. The more she wants to be seen, the more invisible she becomes, until one day she stops trying. She walks for the sake of walking, smiles because she feels joy, speaks because it feels true, and then eyes find her, not because she calls for them, but because she has become an irresistible frequency. No striving, no grasping, just pure presence. This is not some lofty philosophy. This is a principle that governs the mind and energy. When you grip tightly, you close off. When you open, you allow in your subconscious. Every command is received, not through words, but through the dominant feeling behind them. If you repeat positive affirmations while your heart is full of fear, doubt, and scarcity, what gets recorded is not the words, but the fear behind them. On the other hand, when you release, when you no longer need something to feel complete, that is precisely when it arrives. Like the one who has prayed with all their heart. But only when they stop asking and begin to give thanks does the miracle unfold. The universe is not moved by the loudest cry, but by the quietest peace. You do not need to try to feel the sunlight. Just open the window. Likewise, you do not need to fight to be worthy of good things. You simply need to remember that you have always been worthy. Every race you are trying to win may just be a race against your own inner fear, and you cannot outrun fear by running faster, but by stopping, looking it in the eye, and realizing you no longer need it. From that moment on, you walk differently, lighter, deeper, and that alone changes the entire reality around you. The backwards law does not teach you to abandon your dreams, but to abandon resistance, not to give up action, but to give up forcefulness, not to give up direction, but to give up gripping the path. When you let go, it does not mean you have failed. It means you have stopped standing in the way of what is rightfully yours. You may have stood before a door for years, knocking and pleading for it to open, but only when you sit down, grow quiet, and trust does it begin to open by itself, because it was never locked. Only the noise in your mind kept you from hearing the hinge. Begin with a single breath. Place your hand on your chest. Feel the heartbeat. You don't need to try to make it beat. You don't need to force the air to flow in. You simply allow, and in the same way, you don't need to do anything to be loved, to be received, to live fully. You simply need to release what you are trying to control. Open your heart and let life come to you like the water that flows to the sea, without needing direction. For you are the place where the water begins, awakening stories that reveal the truth of the backwards path. Have you ever wondered why the things you desire most often come late, or sometimes don't come at all? Have you ever given your all, sending out countless invitations, hopes, and efforts only to be met with silence? Maybe you're carrying a belief deep inside that the more effort you give, the more worthy the result will be. But perhaps you are going against the current, and maybe the exhaustion you feel is not a sign of lacking energy, but a signal that you've gone far enough in the wrong direction. Pause for a moment and listen to something else, something that may have always been by your side, simply waiting for you to soften in order to see it. In a quiet corner of a noisy city lived a painter named Henry. For 15 years, he pursued the dream of being recognized. He sent out countless sketches, knocked on gallery doors, reached out to every exhibition organizer and anyone who might help him realize his dream. But the answer was always no, or worse, silence. The more he chased the light, the more the darkness grew within him. And then, on a cold winter morning, in an empty room, Henry set down his brush, not out of despair, but because something inside him had shifted. He spoke, not loudly, not sadly, but softly, like a whisper to himself. I paint because I cannot not paint. Not because someone will see, not because someone will praise. I paint because this is who I am. And with that, he kept painting. A week later, someone happened to see one of his paintings hanging in a small cafe on the corner. They weren't looking for it. They hadn't been invited. They simply walked in, drawn as if by an irresistible breeze, that someone was a renowned art curator, and what Henry had once desperately prayed for now came to him, not because he tried harder, but because he had returned to his natural frequency. He stopped being the one who searches and became the one who is found. Henry's story is not a coincidence. It is proof of a silent but precise law. When you release inner resistance, the energy you emit is no longer rooted in lack, but in wholeness. And that is what draws to you all the things you once thought you had to fight for. Like a stone in a river, making no effort, yet the water finds it, it flows past it, caresses it, and continues on. Like Henry, Margaret spent over 20 years searching for love. She read every book, attended every gathering, filled her calendar with coffee dates, conversations, handshakes, but inside, each meeting was a silent interview. She observed, compared, evaluated, filtered, worried, and hoped. She left no room for love to flow naturally. There was no space. It was crowded with expectations, fears, and standards that seemed reasonable, yet were heavy with pressure. Each time she thought she was close, it receded like a tide, pulling away. Then, one rainy afternoon, she sat alone in her small kitchen. She no longer felt sad. She no longer felt alone. She felt peace. She wasn't thinking of anyone. She wasn't waiting for anyone to call. She wasn't looking for someone to arrive. She brewed tea, smiled softly, watched the raindrops touch the window pane. That was all. And in that moment when she stopped waiting for love, love began knocking at her door. 3 men appeared within a month, not from where she expected, not fitting the mold she had created, but bringing a sincerity she had never known. One of them became her life companion. You see, life doesn't work the way we often believe. It doesn't reward the most exhausted. It responds truthfully to the frequency you emit. And desperate longing is a frequency that repels all you want to attract. In this universe, those who receive are not the ones who demand the most, but the ones who let go and trust the most. When you stop searching, you allow yourself to be found. When you stop forcing, you open the path for the best things to appear. Today, I want to ask you something. Has there ever been a time in your life when you stopped searching and what you wanted arrived quietly, yet perfectly? Was there a moment when, without wanting anything, everything began to flow your way? If you've ever experienced that, let it be living proof within you that the backwards law is not a theory, but something you already know. You just need to remember it. And if you haven't yet felt it, try it. Just for one day, try letting go. Don't control. Don't pressure yourself to succeed. Just live. Just be fully and freely. Thank you for listening this far. Thank you for being present. The story doesn't end here. Something deeper is still ahead. But the moment you truly listen is the moment you've already begun to change. You don't need anyone's permission. You only need to choose, and you already have. The paradox of action, letting go to achieve results. James began his day before the city even stirred. A dim yellow light cast itself across pages filled with meticulous plans, endless numbers, projects, seminars, and investment strategies, arranged as if just a little more effort would unlock the gates to wealth. He believed in hard work. He believed that success was the direct result of relentless action. But reality did not align with that belief, even working 16 hours a day, never missing an opportunity, enrolling in the most expensive business courses, results remained distant. His bank account stayed quiet. Deals continued to slip into others' hands, not because James lacked ability, but because he had fallen into a deeper paradox. The more he tried, the farther the results seemed to move away. His body was tired, his mind stretched thin, but his will kept tightening, like a rope fastened to a drifting boat. He didn't realize that the pressure he placed on himself was what made everything heavy and stagnant. Until one evening, after another long day of meetings and disappointments, James sat quietly in his office. The dim light casting his shadow on the wall like a soldier with no battle left to fight, no more ideas, no more strategies to draft. He just sat there. For the first time in years, his mind was still, and in that very moment, something different happened. A message from an old acquaintance, an impromptu meeting, a collaborative proposal he had never planned, yet it unlocked the financial flow he had been chasing for years, not because of any deliberate action, but because he had stopped. Rest is not laziness. It is permission. It is the state in which you no longer obstruct the natural flow. When James paused, he didn't stop his life, he simply stopped resisting. And as the resistance dissolved, his inner energy finally had space to reconnect with the frequencies he had been missing. He didn't receive a reward for resting. It was rest itself that brought him back to his natural rhythm, where results were no longer delayed. Eleanor had once been like James. She was a writer. For 2 years, she struggled to complete her first book, unable to write more than a few pages. Every time she sat down and she began analyzing, editing, pressuring, comparing, her words felt lifeless. Her ideas would run a few lines before drying up like a shallow stream. She wasn't writing from inspiration, but from a self-imposed obligation, writing to get published, writing to be validated, writing to avoid being left behind, and it was this very pressure that shut every door of creativity within her. Until one afternoon, she put her laptop aside, put on her coat, and walked to the park without a goal, without intending to write. When her mind was no longer chained by the need for results, the words began to rise like whispers from afar. That night, she wrote without pause, and strangely, the chapters that followed didn't require thought or effort. They flowed like water over stone, not because she had become smarter, but because she had stopped standing in her own way. Effort, when born from stress, fear, and desperate longing, will not bring you to your destination. It only traps you in a state of battle, triggering chemical reactions of defense, and making your mind behave as if it were fighting against the very thing it desires. In contrast, your natural state, when you feel complete, when you allow, is the space where all good things arise. A flower does not need to force itself to bloom. It only needs light, water, his air, and permission from its own inner rhythm. Life does not need to be pulled. It only needs to be allowed. You can act, but not because you fear what will happen if you don't. You act because it brings you joy. You can strive, but not because you lack, but because you overflow. Action that comes from inner fullness carries no resistance. It is a natural expansion, but action born of lack sends the opposite message: I am not enough. I need something to become someone. And so you run, never arriving. This paradox is not easy to accept because it goes against everything you've been taught. But once you start to observe more deeply, you'll see proof everywhere. The ones who achieve the most are not necessarily the busiest. They are the most grounded. The ones who create great value are not always running. They know how to be still when needed. The silence of a mind unafraid is the birthplace of the most effective action. And when you understand this, you no longer confuse effort with progress. You no longer measure your worth by how busy you are. Instead, you return to a simple principle. When you live and act from a state of calm, clarity, and trust, you don't need to force anything, because what is right will naturally come, not because you made it happen, but because you no longer stood in its way. And that's when results no longer sit at the end of the road. They begin to arise from the very first step you take, in silence and with the flow. The illusion of control, gripping tightly, is letting go. David always woke up with a long list of things to control. From morning meetings to lunch plans to every word in an afternoon call, everything was meticulously arranged, as if the slightest deviation would cause his world to collapse. He lived in constant prediction and preparation. Every detail had to stay within reach. But ironically, life didn't follow the blueprint he drew. The more he tried to control, the more lost he became. Negotiations tangled, personal relationships grew cold, and each day became a new battle to keep everything from falling apart. In David's eyes, there was always a quiet tension, like a man gripping a rope that kept pulling him toward where he didn't want to go. There is a truth that few people are quiet enough to realize. Control does not create safety. It only gives you the illusion that you are managing it. And that belief becomes the trap. When you try to hold on to joy, you lose it. When you cling to a relationship with guarded caution, you suffocate it. When you overplan the future, you shut out the beautiful possibilities that life might bring, if only you were flexible and trusting. Martha understood this. After years of locking herself in a self-made cage of protection, she had always dreamed of great love, a life partner who understood her and built a peaceful life together. But out of fear of getting hurt, she built a fortress of standards, questions, rules, and invisible tests. Each time she met someone new, she filtered them through the lens of doubt. She called it being careful. In truth, it was fear disguised as logic. And as with any unspoken law, love always turned away, not because she was unworthy, but because no one can walk into a room constantly under scrutiny. One day, while sitting alone by the window, Martha noticed something strange. She had everything: a stable job, a cozy little apartment, the freedom of being single. But inside, there was a space she couldn't fill, not because someone was missing, but because she had been blocking herself from living authentically. She set down her notebook, took a deep breath, and for the first time told herself she would stop trying to control the path of love. She would stop scripting, stop questioning, and start feeling. She would let her heart lead. From that day, she changed not through grand gestures, but through softening within. And soon after, love arrived, quietly, not in the shape she once imagined, but in a depth so real, it brought her to tears, tears of being seen, not for her efforts, but for her true self. Control is a form of defense. It stems from a lack of trust in the natural flow of life. It says, if I don't hold on, I'll lose. If I don't plan ahead, it will fall apart. But life is not a mechanical clock that must be wound gear by gear. It is a wild garden that needs light and space. When you control, you tighten. And when you tighten, you cut off the free-flowing energy that could have nourished what you desire. How many times have you planned your day, your week, your year to perfection, only to be thrown off by one unexpected event? How many times have you tried to control a relationship to keep it from breaking, only for it to fall apart faster? That's not failure. It's the intervention of a greater law, a law that doesn't oppose you, but gently removes from your grip what you are holding the wrong way. It teaches you something far more important. True safety doesn't come from everything going according to plan, but from the trust that no matter what happens, you will be okay. Life doesn't ask you to control everything. It asks you to be present. When you are fully present in a moment, you no longer need to control the future, because you are living so deeply that the future becomes irrelevant. And when you live this way, you are no longer driven by fear, but by peace. Letting go is not neglect. Surrender is not defeat. It is a deeper form of wisdom. It is the knowing that some things only come when you no longer try to possess them. When you stop gripping, you start receiving. When you stop setting conditions, You start connecting when you stop trying to control others. You return to mastering the only thing you truly own, your inner state. You don't need to know what happens next. You don't need to control every step. You just need to trust that you will be present for whatever arises, and that what comes carries a wisdom far greater than what you can plan. Sometimes, when you let go, you lose nothing. You only lose the illusion that you ever held it all. And in that moment, you step into a new reality, where life is no longer something you must control, but a river you can surrender to, gently, deeply, and completely free. The power of stillness, silent presence that attracts. Frederick once believed that as long as he acted enough, the solution would appear. He worked late into the night, woke before the sun, packed his schedule with meetings, filled pages and screens with notes, as if missing a single line would cause everything to collapse. New plans replaced old ones. Ideas rushed through his mind like an endless train. Yet the results remained distant, like a light flickering at the end of a tunnel. Work didn't flow more smoothly. The pressure didn't ease. And in fact, everything became more entangled precisely because of his constant effort. Like many others, Frederick didn't realize that the noise in his mind had drowned out the voice of his deeper intelligence. He didn't lack solutions. He simply lacked the space for solutions to emerge. In every ancient philosophy, stillness is never the absence of action, but the root of all effective action. When the water is clear, the lake becomes a mirror. When the mind is quiet, answers rise like seeds sprouting at the right time. It is not because you think hard enough that solutions appear. It is when you stop trying to think that a greater intelligence begins to operate. Clara was a gifted pianist. From a young age, she practiced for hours every day, following the standards of a perfectionist. But the older she grew, the more mechanical her playing became. Though technically brilliant, the emotion faded. She thought she needed to practice more, refine more. But the more she practiced, the more she lost her true sound. One day, in exhaustion, she sat before her piano without any goal. No drills, no preparation. She simply placed her hands on the keys. And then she heard what she had forgotten for years, the silence between the notes. It was that silence that gave meaning to the music. It was the pause that made the melody sing. From that moment on, her music changed. She no longer tried to perform. She listened, and in doing so, she moved audiences not through technique, but through the presence of something deeper, stillness. Stillness doesn't come from retreating from life. It's not hidden in forests or on mountain tops. It exists in the middle of the noisy city, in meetings, in the sound of traffic, in doing dishes, or sitting on the train. It doesn't require you to disconnect, it asks you to connect more deeply. When you are truly still, you don't pull away from the flow. You become a part of it without being swept away. Stillness is a state of non-resistance. It is the space where you no longer try to listen, but begin to hear, no longer chase answers, but realize they have always been present. In quantum physics, particles exist in a state of possibility until they are observed. But when observation becomes too forceful, it narrows what is possible. The same is true for the mind. A noisy mind cannot perceive greater potential. Only when you sit down and release the pressure do you create the space for something new to arise. A young woman named Mira once visited a meditation master, carrying countless questions. She spoke quickly, asked urgently, afraid that if she didn't get all the answers, she would miss something important. The master said nothing. He simply poured tea into a cup. When the cup was full, he kept pouring. The tea overflowed onto the table and onto the floor. She panicked. He smiled. That is your mind. He said, if you don't pause, don't empty a little, then no matter what I pour in, it will only spill out. From that moment on, Mira began sitting in silence every morning, just sitting, no tasks. At first, her mind screamed, afraid of being abandoned, but eventually it softened, and in that softening, and what she had once tried so hard to understand began revealing itself like light spilling into darkness without needing to flip a switch. You don't need to understand everything. You only need to be quiet enough to allow a greater intelligence to take over. You don't need to plan every hour of your day. You only need moments without plans, so that life itself can guide you. You might be surprised to find that the quieter you become, the more magnetic you are. Others will feel depth in you, not because you speak well, but because you are truly present. Ideas will come not because you forced them, but because you were ready to receive. Good things will find their way to you, not because you chased them, but because you no longer push them away with urgency. Silence is the foundation of true magnetism. It doesn't boast, but it is undeniably present. It doesn't need to prove anything, because it is already whole. And in a world where everyone wants to speak, the one who can remain silent holds the greatest power. Start with just 5 minutes a day. Sit still. No phone. No notes. No go. Just breathe and observe. At first, you will feel resistance. But if you pass through the noise, you will reach a space of quiet where every answer already exists. And in that place, you no longer need to chase because everything you need will come to you. No calling, no forcing, only because you have become still enough to allow it in, losing the self to find what is real. In a small monastery tucked away in the mountains, an old Zen master sat across from a young man filled with ambition. The young man had traveled far in search of enlightenment, asking countless teachers, reading all the books, learning every doctrine, but inside he remained full of conflict. He asked the master, how can I find my true self? The master didn't answer right away. Instead, he handed the young man a cup full of water and said, if you want to pour in more tea, what must you do? The young man replied, pour some of the water out. The master nodded, and that was the end of the conversation. No grand theories were given, just a simple image. But many years later, after the young man had lived through triumphs and failures, after the last mask had fallen, he understood, to find what is true, you must first lose who you think you are. The ego is not your enemy, but it is the voice that never stops interpreting, comparing, affirming. It craves to be special, to be praised, to be acknowledged. It builds a persona that you work tirelessly to maintain each day, but that persona is not you. It's a shell you wear to survive in the world, to adapt, to hide the tender vulnerability underneath. And when you become trapped in that role, you lose your real freedom. You stop living, you start performing. You're no longer present. You're managing an image. You're not listening. You're defending. That is the deepest exhaustion of modern life, the fatigue of having to be someone. Anna was a successful communications executive. She appeared at every event, always smiling at the right moment, speaking with poise, embodying the image of a confident, independent woman who needed no one. But behind her office doors, each night as she returned to her quiet apartment, she would sit still for hours, not sad, not joyful, just empty. She didn't know what that emptiness was until one day she let it all go. She left the city and moved to the countryside, where no one knew her name. She worked in a small cafe, lived simply, no business cards, no schedules, And in that anonymity, she began to hear something familiar she had forgotten. This is the power of the voice within, not just a voice you hear, but a space you return to, not an external sound, but an inner space where all noise falls quiet, and you can feel life breathing through you. No more playing roles. She began to live, no longer needing to be understood. She began to understand herself. All deep suffering comes from one root: attachment to the ego. When someone criticizes you, it hurts not because of the words, but because it shakes the image you're trying to protect. When you fail, it's not the result that wounds you, but the ego that feels bruised. And when you're praised, the thrill doesn't come from true growth, but from the ego swelling with pride. Yet all of this is fragile. It makes you a puppet to circumstance. When praised, you feel happy. When criticized, you shrink. You live by others' emotions. That is not freedom. It is dependence at the deepest level. Losing the ego doesn't mean erasing yourself. On the contrary, it is a return to your essence, nameless, formless, with nothing to prove. In that place, you don't need praise to feel worthy. You don't need a stage to feel important. You are fully present, simple, complete. And in that presence, the energy you emit becomes more powerful than any image you ever tried to build. In ancient Eastern philosophy, there is a concept called non-self, but non-self doesn't mean emptiness. It means not being bound by form. Like water, when it's not confined by a container, it becomes flexible and strong. You too, when not confined by ego, become your truest self in its deepest form. And from that place, all action gains power because it does not come from lack, but from a pure wellspring within. You don't need to express more. You need to quiet down enough to see who is watching within. The ego is the wave. The true self is the water. When the waves come, you can see the depth. You don't need to convince the world that you are worthy. You only need to live as if that worth is already a truth beyond question. And then the world will reflect you back, not with applause, but with opportunities, with genuine connections, with doors that open softly yet firmly. When you stop being someone, you begin to become everything. No longer an actor. You become the author, no longer trying to be seen. You become undeniably felt. That is freedom. That is the return to your original home, the place with no defenses, no definitions, just one truth. You are nothing more, nothing less. And at that point, all the energy you once searched for outside begins rising from within, like a spring that never runs dry. This is the power of the voice within, not just a voice you hear, but a space you return to, becoming the observer, no longer identifying with the mind. In the golden light of dusk, in a quiet city park, a middle-aged man sat silently on a bench. He didn't look at his phone, didn't read the paper, didn't talk to anyone. He simply sat there, still, as if listening to something invisible breathing through space. Passers-by paid no attention, but anyone sensitive enough to notice would feel something different in his presence. There was no worry, no burden, no pull from the past, nor push into the future, only a pure stillness. This man had mastered a rare art in today's noisy world, the ability to observe his thoughts rather than be led by them. Most people don't live as observers. They live as if they are their thoughts. A passing idea, I'm not good enough, and the whole day is soaked in self-doubt. A fleeting suspicion, that person disrespected me, and the heart contracts into defensiveness. Thoughts come and go, but they leave traces in emotion, shape behavior, and direct reactions. The more you identify with them, the further you drift from the deeper self behind the noise. Each thought is like a cloud passing across the sky of the mind. But if you think you are the cloud, then you'll be pulled in every direction it moves. Only when you realize you are the sky can you begin to live from a deeper dimension. The observer doesn't need to control thoughts. They simply recognize that thoughts are not the self, and in that recognition, a space opens. The space between the inner voice and the one who hears it. That space is the beginning of real freedom. Lynn's story is a living example. She was a single mother working in advertising. Every morning, as she looked into the mirror, a familiar noise filled her mind. I'm not good enough. I don't have time. I'm ruining my child's life. No one planted those thoughts they had repeated inside her for years. Like many, she believed they were true. Until one day, during her first meditation retreat, she was given one instruction: listen to the mind without reacting. Let each thought come. Don't push it away. Don't fix it. Don't interpret it. Just watch it, like clouds drifting by. And as she stopped attaching to those inner voices, something shifted. The thoughts were still there, but they no longer held power. She no longer followed their old conclusions. She stopped judging herself based on every negative idea. She saw, for the first time, the difference between who she was and what was happening in her mind. This is a subtle yet deeply transformational principle. You are not the voice in your head. You are the one who hears it. And the one who hears cannot be harmed by the voice's content unless they mistake it for themselves. It's like watching a movie. You might be moved, but you know you're not the character. You see, you feel, you understand, but you don't dissolve into it. This is the power of awareness. When you're awake enough to separate from the thought, you begin to choose rather than react. And choice is the clearest sign of a free mind. Being the observer doesn't mean being indifferent to life. It means living more deeply. You are no longer controlled by fleeting emotions. You begin to see the root of suffering. You're not lost in fear, because you recognize it as the product of a specific mental pattern, not an eternal truth. And when you can see a thought as it is, without adding, denying, or resisting, you release the knot between the mind and the impulse to fight. The less resistance, the more freedom. People often ask, how do I get rid of negativity? The answer isn't to replace it with positivity. It's to see it without identifying with it. When you are the observer, nothing needs to be eliminated. You simply keep the light of awareness on. And under that light, every shadow finds its own way to dissolve. Each day is a chance to practice this. When you feel uneasy, in pausa, ask, what am I believing right now? When you feel anger rise, remind yourself, this is a cloud, not the sky. When a judgment appears in your mind, remember it's just a line in the mental movie. You don't have to act it out. Step behind the thoughts. And from that place, you will see more clearly, feel more deeply, and live more truthfully. No need to fix yourself. Just stop confusing yourself with the mask that no longer fits. Freedom does not come from changing every thought. It comes from realizing you are larger than any thought. And when you live as the observer, you are no longer trapped in the role your mind assigns. You become the conscious audience in the theater of life. And in that moment, you no longer live as the struggling character, but as the light that reveals the stage. Calm, expansive, unshakable. From pursuit to attraction, the power of natural magnetism. Helena used to be someone who always pursued. She pursued success, pursued, love, pursued the feeling of being recognized Every morning she woke up with a list of things she had to achieve, tasks to complete, ideals to become, but the more she tried, and the farther everything seemed to drift. Work didn't go as smoothly as expected. Relationships lacked stability. And deep within her, a quiet weariness lingered as if she was chasing something that wasn't real. One day, at a seminar on applied psychology, a single sentence from the speaker stopped her in her tracks. He said, "What you chase is often what you secretly believe you lack. And it is that belief that keeps it beyond your reach." From that moment on, she began observing. She observed how she entered conversations as if she had something to prove, how she worked as if only perfection made her worthy, how she longed for affection, as if it were a kind of salvation. And she realized something profound. It was the very act of pursuit that emitted the frequency of lack. And that frequency created a repeating reality, because in this universe, you don't attract what you want, you attract what you are. If you operate from desperation, you invite a rejection. If you radiate lack, you continue living in lack. When you pursue anything with the energy of fear and insufficiency, you push it further away. Attraction does not come from effort to obtain. It comes from alignment with what you desire. Just like a magnet doesn't chase metal, it doesn't move, it doesn't strive, it doesn't persuade, it simply emits a field, and that field naturally draws to it what resonates. Human beings are the same. When you live in a state of peace, you don't need to search for love. Love recognizes you. When you live as someone who is already valuable, you don't need to demand validation. Your presence becomes undeniable proof. Shifting from pursuit to attraction is a subtle yet powerful transformation. It's not about external behavior, but about the deeper frequency within. When you believe you're lacking, you act from lack. But when you remember your essence is already whole, you act from overflow. And in that energy, the world responds differently. The opportunities you once chased now arrive with ease. The relationships you once begged for now appear naturally, not because you did more, but because you became someone who magnetizes. True attraction is not a strategy. It is a state of being. It doesn't come from pretending to be confident, but from genuinely trusting in your inner abundance. You don't need to say the right thing. Do the perfect thing. You simply need to live in the right frequency. And to get to that frequency, you must release your identification with lack. Every time you believe you need something to be complete, remember it is that very belief that pulls you out of alignment. You don't need more. You need to return. Return to the awareness that you are already part of the abundant flow of life. And from that place, you no longer search for wholeness. You become the source of it. There was once a man who felt hopeless. His work was unfulfilling. His relationships had fallen apart. And his finances were unstable. He tried every self-help technique, every affirmation, every method of action, but the results remained elusive. One day, while walking through a park, he saw a child playing with a fallen leaf. The child wasn't trying to hold on to it or organize it, just interacting in pure joy. The child pursued nothing, and because of that, life arrived fully in that moment. The man woke up. For years, he had forgotten the simple joy of presence. He had lived asking, "How do I get what I want?" but never asked, "How do I become the one naturally aligned with it?" From that day forward, he began to change, not with grand plans, but with a quiet inward shift. He meditated each morning, worked with gratitude, and connected with others, not for gain, but for truth. And slowly, life began to shift, not dramatically, but steadily. The journey from pursuit to attraction is the path from lack to sufficiency, from urgency to presence, from pleading to alignment. When you live as if what you desire is already present, you emit a signal that cannot be mistaken, and the universe, a flawless mirror, will respond in kind. Don't ask how to get more. Ask how to become not a version shaped by expectation, but your truest self whole, rounded, confident, and calm. For it is then that you no longer need to seek. What is worthy of you will begin to seek you, not because you chased it, but because you became its destination. From wanting to allowing, the shift that changes everything. There is an invisible boundary between wanting something and truly receiving it. That boundary does not lie in outer actions, but in the inner frequency you carry. Wanting is a mental state rooted in lack. Allowing is a frequency of trust and inner sufficiency. When you want, you are telling the universe that what you desire is missing in your life, and the universe, which always reflects exactly what you project, continues to bring you more of the same: waiting, absence, incompletion. But the moment you step into allowing, you're saying you're ready. You're opening the door for what already exists in the deeper layer of your subconscious to rise into form. Anna was someone who prayed daily. She wrote wish lists in her journal every night, practiced gratitude, visualized in detail the things she wanted to manifest. But inside, she still felt uneasy. She often asked, "Why do others get what they want so easily? Well, I can't." Outwardly, she was doing everything right, but inwardly, she was pleading from a frequency of lack. During a guided meditation session, her teacher asked her one simple question: if you knew for certain that what you want is coming, would you still keep begging every day? The question struck her because her pleading wasn't born from faith. It was rooted in fear that it wouldn't happen. And just like that, the wanting itself became the barrier. The shift from wanting to allowing is a leap in consciousness. It doesn't ask you to give up your desire. It asks you to release the urgency wrapped around it. When you allow, you say, "I trust the process. I don't need to control the how or the when. I'm aligned with what I've chosen, and I open my heart for it to arrive in the perfect way." This is not passivity. It is the most active alignment of energy, because when you allow, you don't sit in anxious waiting. You live each day as if what you desire is already underway. And that state of being is the most powerful invitation you can send to the universe. There was a man who longed for a deep, healthy relationship. He listed all the qualities of his ideal partner, studied communication, read every book on love. But the relationships he attracted kept repeating the same patterns, disconnected and unstable. One day, he asked himself honestly, "Do I actually believe I'm worthy of that kind of love?" And he realized, though he acted ready on the outside, deep inside he carried the unconscious belief that true love was out of reach. In that moment, he let the wanting go. He stopped searching, stopped refreshing dating apps, stopped trying to prove he was ready. He began living with a quiet trust that if the relationship was meant for him, it would arrive. A few weeks later, a deeply meaningful connection began to unfold, not in the way he expected, but in the right timing, with the right person, and in perfect rhythm, because when you let go of your script, you finally allow something greater to enter. Wanting says, "I need." Allowing says, "I'm ready." Wanting reaches out with hope. Allowing opens with faith. These are two different states of being, and the universe doesn't respond to words. It responds to frequencies. If you are always in the energy of waiting, You will keep waiting. If you live in the feeling of not enough, you will keep attracting experiences of lack. But if you start your day with the knowing that everything is arriving in the right way, at the right time, even without knowing how you have already stepped into the frequency of allowing, the receiving frequency doesn't require you to be perfect. It only asks that you stop resisting. It doesn't come when you've ticked off every goal. It comes when you stop clenching. Just like soil doesn't need to do anything but soften in order for seeds to sprout. When you soften, the miracle can break through. When you stop blocking with doubt, urgency, and defense, you'll begin to notice the subtle, clear signals of life gently moving through you. The practice of allowing begins by asking a different question. Don't ask, when will it come? Ask, how can I live today as if it's already mine? Live as though what you want is already beside you. Give thanks as if it has arrived. Act as someone full, not someone lacking, because you don't need to chase anything. You only need to attune, and when you become the match for what you desire, you no longer knock on the door. The door opens to you. From wanting to allowing is the path from will to trust, from control to cooperation, from begging to resonance. And when you live in that state, what you seek no longer needs to be captured. It becomes something that flows naturally into your life, gently, in perfect timing, as if it always belonged to you. Because in truth, as it always did, you were simply quiet enough now to receive it. From striving to surrender, awakening the power of natural flow, there is a quiet exhaustion many people can't name. It doesn't come from work or family or any specific challenge. It comes from the constant inner tension of having to become, to achieve, to control. Each morning, the mind is preloaded with a checklist of things to do, goals to hit, images to maintain. And in that loop, people no longer live, they wrestle with life. They call it effort, but if you look deeper, that effort often doesn't come from passion. It comes from fear. Fear of not being enough. Fear of being late. Fear of being left behind. And this very striving, born from constricted energy, becomes the biggest barrier to the natural flow of fulfillment. A woman named Mai once shared that she had spent years striving to succeed in her training career. She invested in courses, built her personal brand, carefully crafted every presentation, but she always felt tense. Each course felt like a battle. Each ticket sale was a struggle. Though others praised her for being capable, inside she felt empty. Until one day, a friend said something that stopped her. Mai, maybe life doesn't need you to try harder, it just needs you to come home. She began to wonder, come home to what? And through moments of meditation, she heard something that had long gone silent. This is the power of the voice within, not just a voice you hear, but a space you return to. Asterisk, not an external formula, not a strategy for success, but an inner stillness where there's no force, no pressure, only pure presence. From that space, everything began to shift. She stopped over-planning. She started teaching with the intention to share, not to persuade. She stopped pushing for targets. Instead, she listened for what truly wanted to be expressed from within. And something strange happened. More students came. Feedback became more heartfelt. Revenue rose steadily without aggressive marketing. Because her energy had shifted from striving to surrendering, no longer pushing life toward her, she opened herself to let it flow toward her in its own rhythm. Surrender is not giving up. It is a powerful, conscious act. It's the understanding that you don't need to control every step of the process. It is the trust that there is a greater intelligence, a subtler current orchestrating all of life. And when you align with that current, effort becomes unnecessary because the current lifts you. Surrender means you act not out of fear of what might happen if you don't, but from being guided by something deep and steady within. And from that place, every choice becomes clear. Every move becomes effective, not because you calculated it, but because you stopped resisting. One of the most common misconceptions is that effort is the only path to results. But in reality, there are two types of action. One comes from strained personal will tense and forceful. The other comes from attunement with a deeper power where every action is gentle yet powerful, decisive but unhurried. That's when you do less and achieve more, speak less and resonate deeper. You don't shout, but you're heard. You don't perform, but you radiate because your energy is no longer leaking into unnecessary effort. It flows like a river, focused and whole. When you live in surrender, you don't lose ambition, but ambition is no longer your engine. Instead, it becomes harmony with what wants to be born through you. It's the realization that you're not pushing life to your will. You're dancing with life in a choreography written by the universe's wisdom. In surrender, you don't need to know every step. You only need to be quiet enough to hear the first one. And when you take that step in trust, the next will appear, and the next, each one lighter, not because you've reached the end, but because you've released the weight of needing to. The journey from striving to surrender is a movement from isolated effort to cosmic cooperation, from using your muscles to climb a mountain to using your inner wings to rise through layers of grace. Each time you feel tension, pressure, force pause, ask, is there a softer way? Close your eyes. Return to your breath and listen. This is the power of the voice within, not just a voice you hear, but a space you return to. Asterisk. When you enter that space, everything you were fighting against begins to dissolve. Not because you've done more, but because you've stopped interfering. And then you realize true power doesn't lie in the noise of effort. It lives in the stillness of surrender. The moment you stop controlling, things begin to move, not because you became better, but because you've become a vessel for the most powerful current in the universe, the current that resists nothing, what embraces everything into quiet, natural transformation. At that point, you no longer live to prove, you live to express. You no longer push to achieve. You allow what already lives in you to rise. Absolute faith, the energy of unshakable trust. There is a kind of power that requires no noise, no proof, no external validation. It is the power of absolute faith, not blind belief, not the half-hearted faith we repeat to soothe ourselves, but a faith so deep you don't need to repeat it, defend it, or wonder if it will happen. It is a quiet certainty, a full inner agreement, as if you and the thing you believe in have already become one. And from that space, reality begins to shift in ways the rational mind could never predict. Many people believe they have faith, but what they're really holding is hope. Hope wants something to happen, but still leaves room for doubt. Faith is different. Faith is when you live as if what you desire is already true, even when there's no physical evidence. Faith is when you don't keep checking. Don't look for signs each day. Don't ask if you're on the right path. Faith is deciding that all things are unfolding for your highest good, and you walk with that calm, not rushing, not clinging. A man once failed repeatedly in building his career. He tried one job after another, chased countless business models, But nothing held. One quiet morning, after a sleepless night of reflection, he stood before the mirror and said to himself, "I don't know when it will come. I don't know how. But I choose to believe. I'm being guided." That sentence wasn't meant to comfort. It was a declaration from his deepest core. And from that day, he no longer worked out of fear. He no longer made decisions to avoid failure. He began choosing what made him feel most alive, even if it didn't make sense to others. A few months later, an opportunity came from a direction he couldn't have planned. A connection opened a door. For the first time, his work didn't just sustain him, it nourished him from within. Absolute faith doesn't come from everything going right. It comes from choosing to believe even when nothing is clear, like a seed in the dark earth. It doesn't need to see the sun to believe it will rise. It has no map, no guarantee from spring, just an inner signal saying, "Keep growing." And that very trust breaks through the soil, to light, and becomes a tree. You are no different. Every time you choose faith without certainty, you activate invisible forces working on your behalf. Every time you release fear and the need to control, you return to your original energetic alignment. People say, "Believe it when you see it." But in truth, you see it only when you believe it. Your eyes can only recognize what your mind has agreed with. If you don't believe you're worthy, you won't see the opportunity. If you don't believe you're capable, you won't notice the help that's right in front of you. But when you live from the frequency of faith, you walk through doors others cannot see. You attract support, ideas, and resources from places you couldn't predict. Because faith is not just a mindset, it's a broadcast. It's a vibration that shapes the reality around you. Someone once asked, "How do I gain absolute faith?" The answer is, you don't need to create it. You only need to uncover it. Doubt, fear, anxiety, these are not your essence. They are layers of dust collected from time to trauma and conditioning. Your deepest nature is faith. A child doesn't need to learn to believe they'll be cared for. They don't analyze or negotiate. They simply open their arms and receive. Absolute faith is the same. It doesn't arise from more knowledge, it arises from return. When you return inward, sit with yourself and touch the eternal presence where no doubt exists. You remember, and then you no longer try to believe. You simply live as someone who already knows, someone who doesn't need to prove, someone who doesn't chase signs, someone who doesn't repeat affirmations hoping to change the outside world, but someone who breathes, acts, and walks as if what they've chosen is already true. At that point, there's no strain, no suppression, no debate with fear, just a steady rhythm within, and everything you once hoped for begins moving toward you, not because you demanded it, but because you are now ready to receive. Remember, nothing is more powerful than the energy of faith. Not persuasion, not pleading, not strategy or knowledge, but the deep choice that says, even when I can't see it, I believe I am supported. I believe I am not alone. I believe there is a higher order unfolding. And it is never wrong when you stand on the ground of faith. Nothing can shake you, not people, not outcomes, not chaos. And from that place, the true miracle begins. Not because you forced life to comply, but because you became the open doorway for life to pour in. The universe operates through trust. No plans needed. Most people spend their whole lives making plans. They write out goals, break them into steps, set the deadlines, measure every success and every failure, but then life throws them a surprise, an unexpected twist, a slam door, a detour, not on the map. And in that moment, they realize no matter how carefully they calculated, they still can't control the flow of life. Have you ever wondered what would happen if you stopped planning and started trusting? Not blind trust, but a deep faith that the universe has order, that what needs to arrive will come at the right time, and what needs to leave will dissolve once it has served its part. A woman had worked in finance for 20 years. She was excellent at planning. Every decision, big or small, was analyzed through spreadsheets, probabilities, and risk calculations. But the further she went down that road, the more empty she felt. One day, in the midst of a restructuring wave, she was let go suddenly. No plan B, no pre-designed path. She fell into a void. Yet in that silence, for the first time, she heard a voice within that had long been buried. It didn't shout. It didn't demand. It simply whispered, trust. Let go. Let life lead. She started her days, not with a to-do list, but with presence. She didn't force herself to find a new job. She began painting something she had loved as a child but never pursued because it wasn't in the plan. Slowly, that small joy opened a new path. Her artwork was shared. People placed orders. She was invited to teach. None of it was planned, yet it was natural, fulfilling, and fed her soul more than any spreadsheet ever could. The universe doesn't need your plans to operate. It already has its own rhythm, precise and far wiser than your forecasts. When you try to script every step, you might block possibilities far beyond your imagination. When you trust, you open the door to what logic can't predict. This doesn't mean you become passive or give up. It means you shift from control to collaboration. You act when you feel true inspiration, not pressure. You listen to the flow instead of resisting it. And in that space, everything that arrives has a reason, and every step carries quiet, yet effective power. Have you ever felt tired from always needing to steer everything? Have you looked back and noticed that the most magical things in your life didn't come from plans? Love came when you weren't looking. Opportunities showed up when you weren't chasing. Healing happened when you stopped forcing, and if that has ever been true, maybe it's time to let part of your life be led, not by calculation, but by trust. A friend once told me he spent 2 years building a startup. He worked relentlessly, slept only 3 hours a night, followed every step from success handbooks. Still, he failed. He felt betrayed by his old belief system. But instead of collapsing, he stepped back. No longer forcing himself toward a goal, he began listening to life. One afternoon on his porch, he saw a child play with a paper airplane. Watching that small hand release something light into the air, he cried. Because he realized, while he had been pushing with all his might to lift something heavy, life just needed a gentle release at the right time. And this time, when he started again, with a more relaxed heart, no expectations, no goals, work found him. Connections opened. Success came, and not at the cost of his health or soul. The universe doesn't respond to your plans. It responds to your frequency. If you live in worry, you attract more reasons to worry. If you live in trust, you begin to attract people, situations, and chances that match your ease. The strange truth is, when you no longer need things to go exactly as planned, you end up moving in greater alignment than ever before. Let me ask you something right now. If you knew for certain that what you're seeking is already on its way, arriving in a form better than any plan you've ever created, would you be willing to release it and let life lead? This isn't a question for your logic. But for your body, take a deep breath and feel what rises when you imagine letting go of control. Maybe it's fear, but maybe, just maybe, it's relief. And if you can touch that feeling of relief, you know that you've just opened a door. Thank you for being present with this story, whether with your heart, in your soul, or both. Your quiet presence has made these words more alive than ever. And if there's one thing to carry with you after this, let it be this: you don't need all the answers. You only need to learn to trust the intelligence of life, and everything else will align in the most miraculous way. Silence is the loudest voice, guidance from stillness. When all noise fades, something strange happens. In the absolute stillness, the most important things begin to speak, not in sound, but in intuition, not in words, but in a clarity that cannot be denied. There is a space deep within you that only reveals itself when all movement comes to a stop. That space does not belong to the mind, nor to fleeting emotions. It is the root frequency where all true direction is born. Most people live in noise. The noise of news, expectations, worries, opinions, memories, and the voice of fear. In that chaotic flow, they believe they're choosing, but in truth, they're only reacting. They do not truly know what comes from their own heart and what comes from the invisible pressure of the world around them. And so they go, they run, they chase, they struggle without knowing the real reason why. They lose their sense of direction, not because they lack information, but because they lack the silence needed to hear the real guidance from within. A man once shared that he spent 7 years chasing goals that weren't his. Success came, money came, but nothing ever felt right. One night, exhausted beyond words, he didn't pray for anything. He didn't try to find a solution. He simply sat in the dark. He didn't expect any divine message, but he also didn't resist it. He just sat, breathed, and observed, and in that stillness, a gentle sense arose. It was time to release what no longer fit, no matter how correct it looked on paper. He didn't hear a grand teaching. He simply felt a deep clarity that needed no explanation. Silence does not mean nothingness. It is the purest space where you can touch the original blueprint of your being. In that quiet, directional signals begin to surface not as clear voices, but as firm inner knowing, like a soft light revealing a path you had never seen before. Every plan, every analysis, every strategy pales in comparison to the accuracy of intuition born from stillness. People often mistake wisdom for knowledge. They read more, learn more, gather countless theories, but the more they know, the more confused they become, because truth doesn't live among hundreds of options. It lives in one single direction that can only be recognized in silence. That silence is the place where you're no longer governed by bias, no longer driven by habit or fear. In that moment, everything you feel carries the clarity of morning light, untouched by desire or distortion. A woman once asked why she always felt off track, even when every choice seemed reasonable. She was educated, had a career, and a stable life, but there was a vague sound, like a distant call that never faded. She tried to dismiss it with logic, but no reasoning made it go away, until one day she decided to sit still, not to think, not to calculate, but to listen. In the first few days, her mind was loud like a crowded market. But then, layer by layer, the noise quieted, and one early morning, before the sun rose, she heard the first truly clear message of her life. It wasn't a word, it was a knowing. It was time to live a life in truth with her soul, even if it meant letting go of everything she had Silence is the environment where intuition thrives. The more outside noise, the more inner falseness, the more words, the easier it is to get lost. But when you turn inward and allow stillness to guide you, you stop straying, because true direction has already been imprinted within you. You don't need to ask anyone. You don't need the world's validation. You just need to be quiet long enough to feel. And the miracle is, once you truly hear, there is no more doubt. From that space, you move with no rush. You speak less, but your words carry more weight. You do less, but your actions are more powerful. You don't need to prove anything because you know. You don't need to defend yourself because you're clear. And when you live from that silence, you carry it with you everywhere you go. Your presence becomes a reminder to others that they too can stop and hear the call within. Stillness is not emptiness. It is the foundation upon which everything real begins to speak. When you can be still and not feel hollow, you've entered the depth of the soul. When you no longer need applause or admiration, you've returned to your true source. And from there, you don't need to shout to be heard. You don't need to chase light, because you've become the source of it. Not because of what you do, but because of the space you've learned to hold inside, the space of silence where the loudest voice begins to rise, becoming the reality you desire, embodying the energy you already hold. There is nothing outside of you that you can truly attain without having first become it within. Every reality begins with an internal identity. What you desire does not arrive because you wish or beg for it, but because you align yourself with its frequency. Reality does not respond to scattered words. It responds only to vibration, and real vibration emerges, not when you are chasing something, but when you have already become it. People often believe they must chase after goals, strive to reach what they desire, but in truth, they are only trying to extract from the world what they have yet to give themselves within. They think that once they have money, they will feel secure. But it is the inner sense of security that draws money in. They think that being loved will make them feel whole, but only when they live from a state of wholeness can true love enter. Whatever you are seeking, pause and ask, what energy does this carry? And what state am I currently living from? A man once lived with a constant fear of lack. Though he had a stable job and decent income, he always felt it wasn't enough. He studied the law of attraction, made vision boards, repeated affirmations each morning, but the results never came. Until one day, he realized he had been acting from a state of lack. Every word he spoke carried the frequency of craving, not presence, and in a moment of stillness, he shifted his approach. He stopped asking how to get more money. He began to ask, if I were already wealthy, how would I feel? What would I think? How would I act? What would I choose? And he began to live as if it were true, not with pretense or forced positivity, but through subtle alignment. From that moment, everything began to move. This is the power of the voice within, not a voice you hear, but a space you return to, not an outer sound telling you what to do, but the inner space that reminds you that you have always been enough. From that space, every word you speak carries power, not because it is loud, but because it comes from a self that is already whole. You no longer speak to convince, you speak to declare. You no longer act to obtain. You act as a natural expression of someone who already holds what they desire. Embodiment is both the final step and the first. It is not the step of doing, but the step of becoming. When you desire peace, don't search for places without storms. Become the one who holds stillness in any environment. When you desire success, don't wait for the world to approve. live with the discipline, clarity, and commitment of someone who has already succeeded internally. When you want to be loved, don't try to convince others to love you. Become the very presence of love in every action. Glance and breath, reality cannot help but reflect back what you already are. A woman once shared that she always felt disconnected. She entered every relationship with a longing to be understood and accepted, but the more she longed, the more disappointment followed. She went to therapy, read books, took courses, but nothing truly shifted until she stopped. She asked herself, if I were already deeply connected, how would I live differently? And she began to change. Instead of seeking to be heard, she listened first. Instead of craving validation, she validated herself. And soon, her relationships transformed, not because others changed, but because she became a true source of connection. Everything you long for already exists in the field of energy. It is not far away. It is at the frequency you must align with. You don't need to run to get it. You return to become it. You cannot force reality to come to you, but you can step into a different version of yourself, and that version becomes the doorway through which a new reality unfolds. When you have become, you no longer worry whether it will come. You no longer track time, question the process, or measure your progress. You live as one who already has, already knows, already feels, and that frequency is the clearest signal the universe cannot ignore. When you live from the wave of your choice, everything else recalibrates. Every detail orbits around you like planets around the sun, because you have become the light of what you once only wished for. This is not a technique. This is your essence. It is not a trick to attract something. It is a return to the truth. You do not need to seek outside for what you have never ceased to be. What you desire is not a future experience. It is a remembrance that you have always been enough, that you have always belonged to the source. And when you become, no barrier remains between you and reality. Only alignment, unity, and the natural flow of manifestation. That is life breathing through you as the perfect embodiment of energy that has always been present. Inspired action, the balance between surrender and movement. There is a kind of action that does not arise from pressure, does not stem from the fear of being left behind, and is not aimed at achieving anything. It comes from a place of deep stillness, where no effort is needed, and yet you move with certainty, as if everything has already been arranged. This is inspired action not driven by outcome, but the natural expression of an inner state of wholeness. People often think surrender means doing nothing, and action must come from force. But between these two extremes lies a bridge where letting go and moving forward can coexist. You no longer act in hopes of changing the outcome. You act because you cannot not act. You move not to escape fear or seek validation, but because something within quietly yet clearly pulls you forward. When action arises from inspiration, from alignment with your deeper self, you do not deplete your energy. On the contrary, you are nourished with every step. A man once struggled for years to find direction in life. He went from one workshop to another, but the more he learned, the more confused he became. Each morning, he forced himself to write goals, plan routines, and act according to schedule. But deep down, something didn't feel right. One morning, instead of forcing his day into a template, he simply sat by the window, drank tea, and breathed. In that silence, a gentle feeling arose. Take your camera and go to the park. No goal. Not for content, not for sharing, just to go and observe. And that unplanned walk led him to moments that touched the vivid beauty of the present. Later, others became drawn to his photos, but the miracle wasn't the result. It was that he had moved from a place of deep connection. Inspired action is infused with real presence. It is neither rushed nor delayed. It is not pushed by expectation, but guided by presence. In this state, you do not try to control the process, nor do you freeze from fear of being wrong. You move in flow, as if dancing to a melody only you and life can hear. You trust each step, not because you know what will happen, but because you trust the source from which the step arose. A woman once shared how she always felt pressured to act quickly, seize every opportunity, and never miss a chance. She lived in constant alertness, afraid that if she didn't act in time, everything would slip away. But her body began to protest. She became exhausted, anxious, and unable to sleep. One day, she decided to pause, not to give up, but to listen. In that quiet space, she realized she didn't need to run anymore. She could choose to act slowly, deeply, and consciously. She could say no to what didn't resonate, even if others called it a missed opportunity. And strangely, when she slowed down, the right things arrived faster, because now she was no longer chasing, but resonating. You don't need to do a lot to receive what you desire. You only need to act at the right moment, from the right state. And that can only happen when you pause long enough to listen, not just to receive instructions, but to return to the part of you that has always known. When you act from that place, you don't need motivation or forced discipline. You are guided by an energy that is light yet unstoppable. It doesn't rush, yet it is always ready. It doesn't push, yet it is always clear. And every step you take in that state becomes a silent affirmation. I am ready. I am aligned, and I am flowing with life. The balance between surrender and action is the most magical space of creation, because it is there that you are no longer separate from life, trying to control it, nor are you unconsciously swept away by it. You become a living part of it. You are no longer standing outside the river, you are dancing in it, and all results, doors, and opportunities open, not because you force them, but because you are vibrating at their frequency. Inspired action is not a technique. It is a return to a primal motivation that does not arise from lack, but from fullness. You act not to prove your worth, but because you already know you are worthy. You no longer fear mistakes, because you understand that every step is an expression of life discovering itself through you. And from that state, every action, no matter how small, becomes part of a grand symphony in which you are not just the creator, but the living embodiment of creation in motion. Realizing you are the source, no more striving, there is nothing truly outside of you. Every image you've ever longed for, every emotion you've chased, every goal you've poured yourself into, all of it is a reflection of one truth. You are the source. As long as you believe you must strive to attain, you live as though power lies elsewhere in the future, in someone else, or in an ideal circumstance. But when you truly stop, when you no longer push, no longer strain to control, a miracle begins to unfold. You are not the one searching for light. You are the light itself. You cannot generate abundance from within if you still believe you are lacking. Every action taken from a state of lack only multiplies the experience of lack. But when you live as if you are already full, not just in thought, but in the subtle vibration of each moment, you begin to see the truth. The outer world always mirrors the state you are living inside. No faster, no slower, no more, no less. When you become a steady field of peace, gratitude, and presence, Everything else naturally revolves around you as a law of the universe. Someone once asked, "How do I know I've become the source?" The answer is simple. When nothing needs to happen for you to feel whole, that's when you've arrived. When you can sit in the quiet of an ordinary day, no applause, no fresh achievement, yet your heart is warm, your eyes are clear, and your breath is gentle. You've entered the frequency of true creation. From that place, every action is no longer about achieving, but about expressing. You're no longer chasing, you're radiating. You're no longer trying to change things. You're living as the natural and perfect flow. A man once lived under the weight of success. He read books, set goals, tracked his progress each day. But inside, he felt hollow. At one point, he let it all go, not out of defeat, but because he began to see that everything he had chased was rooted in the belief that he wasn't enough. He turned inward not to wait for something to appear, but to listen to the pure space that needs no words. From there, he began to act not from need, but from inspiration. Success came. But more beautiful than the success was the fact that, for the first time, he no longer needed it to feel worthy, because he had already become the source. You are the abundance you're seeking, not in the future, not in someone else. Right here, in this moment, with one slow breath and an unhurried presence, you can feel it. When you stop straining to become someone else, you return to your original essence, where nothing needs to be proven, and no condition must be met for you to live fully from that place. You'll see that everything you once worked so hard to achieve was only the shadow of something that had always lived inside you. This is the power of voice within, not just a voice you hear, but a space you return to, not a distant call, but a deep remembering that you don't need to go anywhere to find anything. You only need to stop sending the wrong signals. Live truly, breathe truly, love truly, and when you live as if you have always been the source, you no longer need the world's agreement, the perfect circumstance, or anyone's approval. Everything you need flows out of you like a spring that never runs dry, that needs no pumping. From the moment you realize you are the source, you begin to live a different life, a life not governed by results, not tossed by passing emotions, not judged by outside standards. You act because you want to shine, not because you fear being forgotten. You share because you are full, not because you are in lack. You forgive because you understand, not because you need someone to say sorry. And you love because love is as natural as the morning sun, requiring no condition, needing no reason. When you are the source, you stop striving, because striving is the language of someone who still doubts their own power. All you need to do is allow your true self to emerge. Allow life to organize itself around your inner clarity. Allow everything to come and go like ocean waves, not for you to control, but for you to dance with. From now on, you don't need to ask how to get. Ask how to live as if you already have. No more questions of how. Only one question remains: who am I being in this moment? When you live from the source, you no longer seek the light, because you are the light. No need to prove, no need to strain. Just presence clear, honest, and whole. And when you live this way, the entire universe will respond, like the truest mirror, silent but powerful, reflecting back that you have always been the center of creation, the point of origin, the source. You have completed the journey, not by taking steps, but through awareness, from limiting beliefs to the deeper layers of surrender, from becoming the observer to embodying the reality you once desired. You have transcended yourself, not through struggle, but through stillness and trust. Now, there is nothing left to strive for. because you have seen, you have remembered, you have returned to yourself the source of everything you were ever searching for. No more conditions are needed to live fully. No more waiting for the light, because you are the light. And when you live as if that were already true, the entire universe will respond, not with noise, but with a quiet peace that radiates, not with promises, but with resonance. Live from that place, because you need nothing more to begin. You are the beginning